never really know fear until you're alone in the wilderness at night. I'm a hunter, boar hunting mostly. For those who don't know, wild boar are a massive problem in the US. They destroy crops, spread disease, and multiply at an insane rate. That's why they're one of the few animals that you can legally hunt at night in my state, even with thermal scopes. After saving up for almost a year, I finally got my hands on a thermal scope. It cost more than the rifle it was mounted on, but to me, it was worth every penny. I spent hours at the range, dialing it in perfectly, and the moment I felt ready, I planned a night hunt. There was a spot I'd scouted a few weeks prior, a clearing surrounded by thick woods, perfect for boar activity. I parked my truck, grabbed my gear, and set up a vantage point around 10 p.m. At first, everything was normal. I cycled through the settings on my new scope, getting used to the way it worked. I spotted a few deer, but they were out of season. Hours passed, and I decided to move to a second spot nearby. This one felt off. It was quiet, too quiet. No rabbits starting through the underbrush, no owls hooting in the trees. The only movement I'd seen was far in the distance. By 2 a.m., I was ready to call it a night. I'd packed up most of my gear and was considering taking a few practice shots when I heard it, a crunch. It came from the direction of the first spot I'd set up in. I swung my rifle around and looked through the scope. At first, I thought it was a small bear pushing through the bushes. It was low to the ground, moving oddly, almost crawling. I adjusted the zoom, and that's when I froze. It wasn't a bear, it was a man. He was hunched over, completely naked. No shoes, no clothes, nothing. His movements were jerky, almost insect-like, as he pawed at the ground and sniffed the air. My first thought was that he was some deranged hiker, maybe a game warden gone rogue. But that didn't make sense. We were miles from the nearest road, and I would have seen headlights if anyone had driven up. Then, he did something that sent chills down my spine. He squatted low, placing his hands in the dirt between his feet, and tilted his head back for a moment. He stayed like that, completely still. Then, in a voice that didn't match his appearance, a soft, pleading female voice, he called out, "Help! I'm lost!" I didn't move. My sights were trained on the ground in front of him, but I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at him. "Help! Please! I can't walk!" That's when it clicked. This wasn't someone lost in the woods. This was something else. His movements, his voice, it was all wrong. I slowly slung my pack over my shoulder, keeping my rifle in my hands. When I looked back through the scope, my stomach dropped. He wasn't squatting anymore. He was staring directly at me, and he was smiling. The thermoscope made his eyes appear white, glowing like two tiny orbs in the darkness. I was at least 150 yards away, and I'd barely made a sound. How had he heard me? "Go away!" I shouted, my voice cracking slightly. He stood up, and that's when I realized how tall he was. At least 6 feet, maybe more. He was unnaturally thin, his limbs long and wiry. He took a step towards me, then another. I fired a warning shot at his head. He froze, dropping down on all fours like an animal. His eyes barely peeked above the grass, locked on me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "The next one will mess you up," I yelled. For what felt like an eternity, we stayed like that. Me trembling with my rifle aimed at his chest, him crouched low like a predator sizing up its prey. Then, without warning, he bolted to the left, disappearing into the tree line with an unnatural speed. I fired another shot into the bush, not aiming to hit, just to scare him off. I didn't wait to see if it worked. I grabbed what I could and ran for my truck, my gear cluttering in my arms. As I threw everything into the cab and jumped in, I could still hear him in the distance, a sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. When I got home, I told myself it was just some lunatic, maybe a tweaker living off the grid. But when I shared the story on a camping trip, my nephew brought up Wendigos and skinwalkers. I laughed it off at the time, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. Whatever I saw that night, it wasn't human. And if it was, that might be even worse. So take my advice. If you're ever out in the woods, no matter how prepared you think you are, always trust your gut. And for the love of God, don't go hunting alone.